The old man arrived at the prison just before dusk, when the concrete walls seemed to swallow the last light of the day, and the air carried that familiar mix of rust, sweat, and resignation. He walked slowly between two guards, wrists cuffed, ankles heavy, his shoulders rounded not only by age but by something deeper, something invisible. His gray hair was thin and unkempt, his face lined with years that looked hard-earned rather than gently lived. To anyone watching, he appeared harmless, almost fragile, the kind of man who should have been sitting on a park bench feeding birds instead of stepping into one of the most brutal cell blocks in the facility. Conversations died down as inmates noticed him. New arrivals always drew attention, but this one drew laughter. Victor noticed him instantly. Victor always noticed weakness. He was sitting on a bench near the bars, massive arms crossed, tattoos crawling up his neck like warnings. He had built his reputation on cruelty, on breaking men quickly so no one ever questioned his place at the top. When he saw the old man shuffle forward, Victor's mouth curled into a grin. "You've got to be kidding me," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "They run out of criminals and start arresting retirement homes now?" Laughter erupted around him. The guards ignored it, as they always did, pushing the old man toward his cell. The old man didn't look at Victor. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were calm, almost distant, as if he had already accepted this place long before arriving. That calm irritated Victor more than fear ever could. As the cell door clanged shut, Victor stood and walked over, gripping the bars inches from the old man's face. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "You lost? This isn't bingo night." The old man slowly sat on the narrow bunk, folded his hands on his knees, and remained silent. Victor waited, expecting a reaction. Anger, fear, at least a glance, but got nothing. That silence felt like an insult. Over the next hours, Victor made it his mission to remind the old man where he stood. He kicked the bars, rattling them violently. He mocked the way the old man walked, the way he breathed, the way he stared at nothing. "You gonna cry when the lights go out?" Victor taunted. "Or are you already too tired for that?" The other inmates laughed, but a few glanced at the old man with curiosity. Most newcomers crumbled fast under Victor's attention. This one didn't. Night fell, lights dimmed, and the noise settled into a low, restless hum. The old man lay on his bunk, eyes open, breathing steady, while Victor watched from across the way, annoyed that his words had bounced off like they meant nothing. The next morning, Victor escalated. At breakfast, he accidentally knocked the old man's tray to the floor, mushy food splattering across concrete. "Oops," Victor said, smirking. "Guess your hand's too shaky." The old man looked down at the mess, then up at Victor. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Victor expected anger. What he saw instead was something else, recognition, almost like the old man was measuring him, weighing him. Then the old man calmly knelt, gathered what little food he could, and returned to his seat without a word. That unsettled Victor more than shouting ever could. Over the next few days, the harassment became routine. Water dumped through the bars onto the old man's blanket. Whispered threats in the dark. Sharp elbows in the yard. Each time, the old man absorbed it with the same quiet endurance. He spoke to no one. He asked for nothing. He simply watched, listened, and waited. Some inmates began to murmur. "That old guy's strange," one said. "Ain't scared at all," another replied. Victor heard it all and hated it. Fear was his currency, and the old man refused to pay. One afternoon in the yard, Victor finally shoved him hard from behind, sending him stumbling forward. The old man caught himself before falling, straightened slowly, and turned. His movements were careful but deliberate, not clumsy. He looked Victor directly in the eyes and spoke for the first time since arriving. "Be careful," he said quietly. No insult, no threat, just those two words. Victor laughed loudly, but something inside him tightened. There was no fear in the old man's voice, only warning. That night, Victor leaned close to the bars again, his voice low and sharp. "You think you're special?" he hissed. "Men like you don't last here. The old man opened his eyes and answered evenly, "Men like me have lasted in worse places." Victor stepped back, unsettled, anger boiling beneath his skin. He didn't understand why this frail stranger refused to break, why his presence felt heavier than it should have. As the lights went out, Victor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the old man's calm gaze in his mind, unaware that this was only the beginning, and that the joke he thought he was playing would soon turn into the most terrifying lesson of his life. The prison had its own rhythm, a slow, grinding cycle of boredom and brutality, and by the time the old man had been there a week, everyone felt the subtle shift he caused without fully understanding it. Victor felt it most. The laughter that once followed him everywhere had grown quieter, less certain, as if the walls themselves were listening. He hated that. He told himself the old man was nothing, just another fragile body waiting to be broken. Yet his mind kept drifting back to that calm stare, the way those tired eyes had held no fear. Victor tried to drown the feeling by becoming louder, harsher, more violent with others, but it only sharpened his irritation. Rumors began to crawl through the cell block like insects. Someone said the guards treated the old man differently, not kindly, but carefully. Someone else claimed they'd seen the old man's file by accident, thick with pages yellowed by time. Victor scoffed at all of it, but curiosity gnawed at him. One afternoon, during work detail in the laundry room, Victor saw his chance. The room was loud with clanging machines and heavy with steam, the air hot and wet, visibility low. The old man worked silently at a folding table, his movements slow but precise, hands steady despite their age. Victor dismissed the other inmates with a glare and stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. "Funny thing about places like this," Victor said, his voice low, "they strip away whatever you pretend to be. All that's left is what you really are." The old man didn't look up. "That's true," he replied calmly, "but not in the way you think." Victor's jaw tightened. He shoved the table hard, sending folded sheets sliding to the floor. "You think you're smarter than me?" he snapped. The old man finally lifted his eyes. They were steady, alert, far too alive. "No," he said, "I think you're angry." Victor swung without warning. A heavy punch meant to end the conversation forever. What happened next unfolded in a blink. The old man stepped forward instead of back, his body turning at an angle that stole the force from Victor's strike. His hand caught Victor's wrist, twisting just enough to lock the joint, while two fingers pressed into a precise spot along Victor's neck. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flourish. It was efficient, practiced, terrifying. Victor's breath vanished from his lungs as if the air had been cut off. His knees buckled, pain exploding through his nervous system, his muscles refusing to obey him. He collapsed to the floor, gasping, eyes wide with panic. The old man leaned down, his voice barely audible over the machines. "I don't like hurting people," he said softly, "but I won't be hurt anymore." Footsteps echoed, guards shouting, and the old man released his grip instantly, stepping back as Victor lay shaking, humiliated and confused. When the guards arrived, they found Victor on the ground and the old man standing quietly, hands at his sides. Victor tried to speak, tried to accuse him, but the words tangled in his throat. How could he explain that a frail old man had undone him in seconds? The guards separated them, warning both, but Victor knew the truth had already escaped into the prison's bloodstream. That night, the cell block buzzed with whispers. Victor lay awake, staring into darkness, replaying the moment again and again. The pain had faded, but the fear hadn't. He'd been strong his whole life. Strength was all he'd ever trusted. And yet, in one instant, his strength had meant nothing. Over the following days, Victor avoided the old man completely. He walked different routes, kept his distance in the yard, spoke less. The men noticed. The bully had lost his roar. Meanwhile, pieces of the old man's past began to surface. A lifer who'd been inside for decades recognized him from an old story, something whispered among criminals who believed in ghosts. The old man had once been a weapon, trained beyond normal limits, sent into places no one else survived. Governments denied his existence. Enemies feared his name. He had ended lives with precision and walked away without a trace. When Victor finally heard the full story, sitting alone in the corner of the yard, his stomach turned cold. The old man hadn't fought back out of anger or pride. He'd acted out of restraint. Prison, Victor realized, wasn't the punishment. It was the old man's choice, a place where he could never be asked to kill again. The realization cracked something inside Victor. He began to see his own reflection differently, not as a king, but as a frightened man hiding behind violence. Days passed. The old man returned to his routines, folding laundry, walking the yard, saying little. Victor watched him from afar, his chest tight with emotions he'd never learned to name. Finally, during evening yard time, Victor approached him, slowly, carefully, like one might approach a sleeping animal. "Why didn't you finish it?" Victor asked, voice rough. The old man studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because I've already destroyed enough lives," he said. Victor swallowed hard. For the first time, someone stronger than him wasn't interested in domination. The silence between them felt heavier than any threat. Victor walked away changed, though he didn't yet know how. He only knew one thing for certain. The old man he'd mocked wasn't a joke, and whatever he'd been before prison was far deadlier than anything Victor could ever pretend to be. The prison felt different after that, as if an invisible line had been crossed and everyone sensed it even if they couldn't name it. Victor was no longer the storm that ruled the cell block. He moved more slowly now, spoke less, watched more. The men who once laughed at his jokes noticed the change and kept their distance, unsure whether he was wounded or simply waiting. The old man remained exactly as he had always been, rising at the same hour, folding his blanket with care, walking the yard in quiet loops, his presence steady and unassuming. Yet something had shifted in how others looked at him. Eyes followed him with a mix of respect and unease, the way people looked at a fire they knew could burn if touched. Victor tried to ignore it, but the truth pressed in on him from every direction. He replayed the moment in the laundry room endlessly, not the pain, but the restraint. Anyone else would have taken revenge, would have crushed him publicly to send a message. The old man hadn't. That restraint haunted Victor more than any beating ever had. Nights became restless. He woke drenched in sweat, hearing the hiss of steam, feeling his lungs seize up again. For the first time since he was a boy, Victor felt small. He started to notice things he'd never cared about before. The way weaker inmates flinched when he walked past, the fear in their eyes that looked a lot like his own had in that moment on the floor. One evening, he saw a young inmate being cornered by two men near the showers, their voices low and predatory. Normally, Victor would have laughed or joined in. This time, he stepped in without thinking. "Leave him," he said. His voice lacked its old cruelty, but it carried weight. The men backed off, confused. The young inmate ran. Victor stood there, heart pounding, unsure of what he'd just done or why it felt strangely right. Word spread again, this time differently. Victor wasn't hunting anymore. He was stopping fights. The guards noticed. The inmates noticed. And the old man noticed. One afternoon in the yard, the old man sat beside Victor on a concrete bench, close enough that Victor could feel his presence without being threatened by it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sky above them was pale, washed clean by wind. "Change is uncomfortable," the old man said at last. "It's supposed to be." Victor exhaled slowly. "I thought power was making people afraid of you," he admitted. "That's what I've always known." The old man nodded. "Fear is easy," he said. "Anyone can use it. Real strength is choosing not to." Victor stared at his hands, scarred and heavy. "I don't know how to be anything else," he said quietly. The old man looked at him with something like understanding. "You learn the same way you learned to be this," he replied. "One choice at a time." Days turned into weeks. Victor kept choosing differently even when it cost him. He lost his throne, his reputation, but gained something unfamiliar. Sleep. The nightmares faded. His body relaxed in ways it never had. Meanwhile, the old man remained a constant, never preaching, never demanding. Some inmates tried to provoke him, testing the rumors, But one look from those calm eyes was enough to stop them. Eventually, Victor gathered the courage to ask the question that had burned inside him since the truth came out. "Why are you really here?" he asked one morning as they walked the yard together. The old man slowed, then answered, "Because I spent my life deciding who lived and who died. I don't trust myself with freedom anymore." Victor absorbed that in silence. "Do you regret it?" he asked. The old man thought for a long time. "I regret who I became while doing it," he said. "That's why I stay." The honesty in his voice struck Victor harder than any blow. In that moment, Victor understood that prison wasn't just punishment. For some, it was refuge, a place to stop running from themselves. Months later, a transfer came through. The old man was being moved to another facility, quieter, more secure. On his last day, Victor walked him to the gate. "You saved me," Victor said, struggling to meet his eyes. The old man shook his head gently. "No," he said, "you did that yourself. I just reminded you who you could be." The gates closed behind the old man, and Victor stood alone, changed forever. He wasn't feared anymore, and strangely, he didn't miss it. In a place built on violence, the deadliest man Victor had ever known taught him the simplest lesson of all. Real power isn't in destroying others, but in mastering yourself.